I try to avoid everything political because politics genuinely just aren't fun and tend to bring in people who only like politics while scaring off everyone else. But I have to say, the reactions have been a good reminder that a large section of the VTuber community hates anything that they think is right-wing. Like, not disagree, hate. They think if something is right-wing, it's inherently evil and must be destroyed. All I can say to those people is if half of society is a Nazi in your eyes, you need glasses. So, how's being apolitical going? Things have been heating up, shall we say, in the last few months. I mean, they've been cooking for a while now, but we're really hitting a boil lately, aren't we? Everyone's mad, everyone's angry, everyone's getting political. Content creators, I'm sure that you have done your best to stay out of the weeds and avoid touchy subjects whenever possible, but we're reaching that point where nothing feels safe to talk about, right? The problem that I am seeing is that a lot of creators who try very hard to avoid controversy keep accidentally butting heads with one side or the other, without realizing how they even got there. One minute you're commenting on how much it sucks that you can't afford to ship merch to the US anymore, and the next you're being bombarded by dudes talking about taking back their country. Or maybe you say something that's considered the norm where you live, and suddenly you've got an army of, well, the kinds of people who like my content, sorry, trying to ask what exactly you meant by that in your comment section. Whole thing's a clusterfuck all the way down, and most of the time you're left asking yourself, how did I get here? You didn't say anything political, right? You didn't bring up politicians or voting or government or anything like that, so how are you suddenly embroiled in politics? Why are you suddenly left or right-wing to a bunch of people who don't even know you? What did you do wrong? Why can't we all just get along? I can tell you exactly where you went wrong. You did your best to avoid politics, it's true, but you failed to avoid a much more pernicious and all-encompassing shadow that looms large over all of politics and culture. You tripped and fell headfirst into ideology. You see, politics can be best described as the activities associated with the management of human society, including rules, laws, social norms, customs, traditions, economics, all that good stuff. But ideology is the set of beliefs or values that drives how you understand and interact with the world. Ideology informs your politics. Ideology shapes your views on culture. Ideology is everything. Odds are that if you live in the first world, or even most of the former second world with a few large exceptions, you are ideologically oriented toward liberal ideas. Now, this isn't liberal in the sense of some party or some country-specific politics, okay? I am not talking about that. I am talking about
ideological
liberalism. Free press, free markets, free enterprise, free real estate. Liberalism, and its corollary, capitalism, is the dominant political force in most Western countries. It's the status quo, it's the way things are, it is the best, worst system. If you're apolitical, or centrist, or moderate, or whatever else you want to call yourself, then you are ideologically liberal. You situate yourself firmly between the left and the right. You're the default, the presumed dissenter. With that in mind, let's circle back to that tweet. A large section of the VTuber community hates anything they think is right-wing. Now, as a liberal, you're probably looking at this and thinking, maybe they do or maybe they don't, but why does it matter? Why does this one side hate the other so much? I mean, surely we can find room for compromise and civil discourse. Surely we can find a middle ground. Let's all be rational here. The problem is, you're still thinking about politics rather than ideology. In the politics of most liberal countries, there honestly isn't really a huge ideological gap between the left and right-wing parties. Sure, they will get all fired up and they might even sling some pretty startling ideas around, but at the end of the day, they'll be forced to compromise and find common ground. That's how governments function. They maintain the status quo. Admittedly, that Overton window of acceptable liberal doctrine has been straining lately, but my point stands. The reason that actual people who aren't politicians, people outside the political mainstream, hate each other is because they are ideologically oriented to do so. Their ideological beliefs exist outside of the political mainstream. Any political views they hold flow downstream from their ideological perspectives. And their ideological perspectives are shaped by, well, actually, what shapes ideological perspectives is itself a matter of ideological perspective. So let's not get into the weeds on that one. So essentially, this video has 3 questions to answer. What do these people believe? Why can't they get along? And why does this matter to you? Let's start with the first. What does everyone actually believe? Let's start with what we know. Liberalism. Liberalism is the status quo. It's the basic fabric of the only culture, society, economics, and politics that you have ever known. Liberalism emerged from the ideas of the Enlightenment, promoting rationalism, private enterprise, free trade, and individual liberty. Liberalism holds that freedom, liberty, and individual well-being are best served by participation in the economy, the impartial arbiter of value and success. Economic prosperity replaced the divine right of kings as justification for wealth and power, giving every able, willing person the opportunity to ascend from the station of their birth. Trade and capital accumulation are the ultimate measure of societal success, so liberalism demands that the state be the protector and ensurer of the conditions of economic success and individual well-being. The rights of private property, of trade, and of individual liberty are sacrosanct. Under liberalism, the individual is atomic, immutable, inviolable. Homo economicus, acting in his own rational self-interest to pursue wealth and success. No state should impede any person's life or liberty except in cases of wrongdoing. Political disagreement can be resolved through rational discourse, moderation, and common sense, as all parties ultimately share the goal of preserving the liberal system. Okay, I think that was worded eloquently enough to make me sound well-informed on the topic. Now let's talk about the forms of liberalism that you're most familiar with. The 2 opposite poles of the status quo. Social democrats, progressives, liberals in the popular sense. You, when you argue with that one problematic uncle at family gatherings. This is left-wing liberalism. The progressive. When you think of the left wing, this is typically what you imagine. According to the left liberal, we can do better. Liberal democracy and capitalism are great. They have provided opportunity and freedom to millions. They have created the modern world. They have opposed authoritarianism, but we still have more to accomplish. We just need to keep improving the status quo, keep tweaking and adjusting things until everything is perfect. The history of liberalism has been fraught with inequality and oppression, and the progressive wants to rectify that. The progressive's country is far from perfect. They might even distance themselves from it, but at the end of the day, they just want to see the fulfillment of the original project, you know? There's a fundamental goodness somewhere under all that historical weight, and it's up to us to achieve it. Call it patriotism, but verified. When critiquing the past and present, the progressive might even take things a step further. Maybe capitalism hasn't fully developed on its promises. Don't get them wrong, though. Don't get them wrong. They aren't interested in getting rid of capitalism or anything like that. God, no, that's insane. The last century made it pretty clear that liberal capitalism is the way to go, obviously, but it does have some flaws. Income inequality, inefficiency, deregulation, disparities between different groups of people, between Can't I bring myself to say that? The progressive is tired of living in the past. The world has changed. Living standards have risen, but so have inequality and international competition. People are more aware than ever that we live under certain institutions that favor some people over others for abhorrently bigoted reasons. Things change, and we need to change too. And we have that power. We can shave off those rough edges of liberal capitalism. We can heal social divides. We can ameliorate suffering. We can use our incredible wealth to make our society better and more accepting. We can help the working class. The hell? What is it about that word? The progressive isn't asking for anything major, okay? Just go and vote. Vote for the right people, for rational and intelligent politicians who have your best interests at heart. People who can ensure that everyone gets a fair shake, no matter their race or religion or ethnicity or gender or sexuality or ability. Anything. They want more representation in media, more female and queer and people of color CEOs. They are not talking about revolution or anything, okay? We just want reform. The progressive believes in peaceful protest and obeying the law. They want people to stop being so gross online and stop being so openly bigoted, you know? The system is good, I promise. We can make it better. Who, conservatives? No. To the progressive, they're just a bunch of uneducated hicks voting against their own self-interest anyway. Who cares what they think? I mean, what are they gonna do? Conservatism, Tories, American libertarians, that one problematic uncle at family gatherings. This is right-wing liberalism, a conservative. When you think of the right wing, this is typically what you imagine. To the conservative, kids these days are just too soft, you know? Democracy, capitalism, yeah, those are good, whatever. The status quo, okay? And the conservative will defend those core concepts just like any other liberal. And like any other liberal, the conservative is ideologically unable to criticize that status quo when things go wrong. Free enterprise and liberal fundamentals are off the table, so the conservative has to find other causes for society's ills. To the conservative, those problems are cultural. Society, individual attitudes, this younger generation, the failure to do things the old-fashioned way. The conservative views social and economic hardship as the logical outcome of social change. Things got markedly worse at some point in the last 20 years or so, and also, people started cringing at his banger joke about gay people in the same time period, so correlation? What happened in those 20 years? What changed? To the conservative, the answer is simple. Society changed. We got too soft, too lax, too permissive of new ideas. People don't work like they used to anymore. They demand things like health insurance and overtime pay and minimum wages. The state intervened too much, allowing the lazy and the unwilling to avoid putting in an honest day's work and contributing to society. Welfare queens, McDonald's hot coffee lawsuits, the PC police, the Hate America First crowd, the baby killers, the immigrant lovers, the radical Democrats, the feminists, the games journalists, the cancel culture, the Antifa rioters, the critical race theory, the litter boxes in the schools, the woke mind virus, the pronouns, the DEI, that bitch Shelley in HR who said that my banger joke was homophobic. Look, the conservative, he doesn't hate anybody, per se. No, you've got it all wrong. You've been listening to the mainstream media again. The conservative thinks everyone should have the right to live their lives however they see fit. In their own communities. In the privacy of their own homes. Away from him. Where he doesn't have to see or hear it. Or pay for it with his tax dollars. Which he is assured is happening. Look, he's stressed enough about being able to afford groceries as it is. He's watched society and culture pass him by for years, and his bills just kept piling up. Every day he looks into the mirror and sees his own father more and more, and he doesn't know how to feel about that. He can't quite relate to people anymore. He resents the fact that so few people think like he does. And if he has to hear one more thing about the kind of nonsense that they allow these days, he is gonna... Reactionaries, nationalists, ethno-supremacists, the alt-right, Nazis. This is the endgame of right-wing extremism, fascist. At this point in the video, you might notice a change in my tone. I've tried to add some light humor throughout so far, but I can't in good conscience do that with fascism. I need to be as serious and straightforward as I can when discussing this dangerous and self-reinforcing ideology, as opposed to the dry and vague ways in which fascism is depicted in most Western education systems. I'm not even talking about politics. You are aware, to some extent, of the horrors of historical fascism. No, I am, as always, talking about ideology. The mindset. What lurks behind the mask. The fascist is, above all else, resentful. Whether he believes it or not, whether you, dear viewer, believe it or not, the fascist's fundamental view of the world is pessimistic, misanthropic, cruel, and resentful. Fascism is the politics of resentment. Remember what they took from you. This is the calling card of reactionary thought. The idea is that you, almost always the cis, straight, white male, though this umbrella can expand or contract when needed, have been robbed. The world of your childhood, those rose-tinted memories of only the good times, of the times before stress and finances and jobs and social mores, that world wasn't just the product of nostalgia. That was real. And it was taken from you. Stolen. The life that you saw reflected in media and culture, the life that you were promised, wealth, a house, an obedient wife, 2.5 kids and a dog, a white picket fence, hasn't come to pass. Something has prevented you from achieving greatness, says the fascist. Or perhaps even your nostalgia isn't a lofty enough vision. Perhaps there was some time even before you were alive, some vague mythologized past in which things were better. The details of the idealized past are irrelevant. What is important is that somehow you have been deprived of that greatness. You've been cheated. You've been robbed. You've been held back. No, you've been stabbed in the back. Think of every angry, racist, sexist, transphobic person you've ever met. Think of how they frame themselves, how they respond to culture. It's resentment. It's bitterness. It's reaction. They have no pity or empathy for those they torment because they feel that they are the ones who have been wronged. Even if the fascist is materially well off, he understands that his standard of living has declined from what it once was. Distantly, he understands that previously underprivileged people have seen marginal improvements to their quality of life and acceptance in society, and he correlates those two concepts. He is lost, and they have gained. He understands that his world is in crisis, that the liberal capitalist status quo is straining under the weight of its own contradictions, that history is at a crossroads. Like the conservative, he acknowledges that society and culture have changed around him, but the fascist is not content to grow old and complacent and bitter. No. The fascist doesn't just resign himself to the disease of modernity. He wants to cure it. The fascist has no need for the tools and understanding necessary to seek deep, systemic, material analysis of the conditions of the world around him. He has no time for nuance, or perspective, or subjectivity. He has a simple, clear-cut, infallible understanding of the problems of the world. He knows what's at stake. Civilization as he knows it, his culture, his heritage, what he thinks his father and his grandfather had, what he was promised. And he knows who stole it from him, who ruined his perfect world and took away what he was owed. Them. The stranger, the outsider, the freak, the degenerate, the other. To the fascist, there is only him, himself and people like him, who think like him, and look like him, and act like him, the in-group, the Volk. The fascist only recognizes the humanity of those he can understand. He can't understand the other, so they are not human to him. The fascist sees his in-group as an endangered species that is always under threat from the other. He is always concerned about birth rates. There need to be more like him. People like him are the best. He can understand them. It's not just that he was promised a wife and kids when he was younger. No, no, no. The fascist now understands that he needs that wife to make those kids. Reproduction is the most important task to the fascist. Women are meant to be at home, making and taking care of babies, and doing as they are told, while the man, him, sets out to conquer the world, to succeed and to thrive and to take what is rightfully his. Anything that stands in the way of reproduction is an enemy to the fascist. People opposed to his eugenic natalism, women with the autonomy to defy him, queer people who reject his clear-cut gender roles that he has known since childhood, trans people, oh, especially trans people. Trans women who, in the fascist's mind, give up their privileged position and muddy the sexual hierarchy, or trans men who, again, in the fascist's mind, sacrifice their only biological purpose of child-rearing in an act of selfish defiance. The Nazis had a term for these people: degenerates. As a side note, the reason degenerate has become a slang term on most of the internet is because edgy little Hitlerites on 4chan used to self-deprecatingly refer to their fetishes and special interests as degenerate behavior, in reference to Nazi views on non-standard sexuality and behavior. When that left containment and spread to the rest of the internet, people were unaware of the term's origins and simply understood it to be a self-deprecating term to describe sexual or weird. And no, I am not saying that we all need to stop using that word or that you're a fascist for saying it. It's diffused too far into the broader internet culture for most people to have been aware of the original meaning. The genie's out of the bottle, so to speak. I just think it's useful to know this kind of thing. There is a reason that one of the first German institutions destroyed by the nascent Nazi movement was the Institute for Sexual Research, a standout research center that was already performing early gender-affirming surgeries in the 1930s, whose destruction set back research into gender and sexuality for decades across Europe. And that reason is the fascist demands strict sexual hierarchy and the propagation of his people. He resents anyone who tells him no, who doesn't accept his worldview, who refuses their assigned role, who rejects him or is uninterested in him. He is the most important, the most special, the most perfect, the most deserving of love and praise and obedience and sex, and anyone who refuses him is his enemy. Anyone who refuses him is the other. He does not understand the other, so they are not human to him. The fascist despises anything that prevents him from reproducing, just as he despises any corruption of natural hierarchies. Namely, those hierarchies that he has constructed and reinforced to maintain his own superiority, which justify putting him at the top of the hierarchy and them at the bottom. The fascist justifies these hierarchies with flimsy rationales of competition, of survival of the fittest, of the strong dominating the weak. The fascist thrives on the idea of strength and competition, of the right to rule, of hierarchies justified by brute force and conquest. Those hierarchies are indisputable and concrete to the fascist. He will not tolerate any doubts about subjects like race, ethnicity, gender, or sexuality. To the fascist, questioning his worldview is tantamount to questioning reality itself. The fascist believes that a universal, objective truth exists for all people, and that refusing to agree with it, refusing to agree with him, is an act of hostility and subversion, if not outright lunacy. To suggest subjectivity, to defy the natural order created in the fascist mind, is a betrayal of the highest order. Those who refuse to agree with the fascist become other. The other. Them. These are fascism's enemies. As we've already discussed, queer and trans people are otherized and dehumanized for subverting the fascists' ideas of natural hierarchy and reproduction. Those who might otherwise be part of the in-group, but who refuse to entertain the fascists' ideas, especially those who are openly opposed to fascism as a social and political project, such as socialists, are also otherized and dehumanized. Those outside of the fascists' racial or ethnic in-group are easily otherized and dehumanized. This phenomenon in particular is probably the most well-known to anyone familiar with historical fascism. The enemy within, historically, Jewish people, Roma, and immigrants, are accused of infiltrating and spreading crime and disorder, of betraying the nation, of twisting the culture, of exploiting and tricking and outbreeding the in-group. The enemy without, those who live on desirable land, historically indigenous people, people of color, or neighboring ethnic groups, these are lesser people to the fascist. Unintelligent, savage, and in need of the fascist in-group to paternalistically guide them toward being more useful. Their cultures and ideas mean nothing to the fascist. Their land and their resources and their labor are the only things of value. Sometimes, the in-group can temporarily expand to include loyal or useful groups, such as collaborators or compradors. This is never permanent. Once the fascist has defeated one enemy, he must turn his eyes to another. Always, without fail, there will always be a them. I cannot stress this enough. No one is safe from the fascist. His entire ideology is built on the idea that they have ruined his society. If he removes them and society remains imperfect, he cannot entertain the notion that he was wrong. No, there must be another them to be exterminated. The fascist will create new subgroupings of people, new ways to define in-groups and out-groups, and why shouldn't he? He's already arbitrarily defined those hierarchies to begin with, so why not add more categories? He can add as many classifications and phenotypes and physiognomies and ideological enemies as he wants until the rot of liberal society is purged in a cleansing fire of barbaric, tribalistic violence. The fascist does not care if you are one of the good ones, or if you were normal, or if you were law-abiding. Once he runs out of Jewish people, of Roma people, of trans people, of queer people, of communists, of socialists, of liberals, of protesters, of indigenous people of color, of religious minorities, of immigrants, of Palestinians, he can never be satisfied. The fascists' thirst to build a better world, to return to tradition by purging it of them, does not work because they are not the cause of his problems. But he can't reckon with that. So he must always keep creating new thems. The fascist is a resentful misanthrope who yearns for a world in which only he exists, alone, without them. He is desperate to avoid confronting the flaws of his own psychotic worldview, refusing to take accountability for his own violent excesses and exploitation. He does not understand, refuses to understand, that a world in which he is rid of the unknowable other, a world without a scapegoat, is a world in which he must confront his own flaws. Revolutionaries, radicals, leftists, Marxists, the epitome of the left-wing ideological project, the socialist. At this point in the video, I will once again remind you that I'm speaking to ideology, not to concrete politics. In most of the liberal world, we are taught all about the evils of actually existing socialism, authoritarianism, surveillance, repression, and all of those other lovely things George Orwell wrote about in 1984 when he wasn't reporting gay people to British police for being communists, that is. You know, maybe Animal Farm would work better as an allegory for the October Revolution if the guy who wrote it had ever actually visited the USSR for more first-hand knowledge, but I digress. We're not discussing history or politics unless it's relevant to the discussion of ideology, just as we did with fascism. The socialist is, above all else, hopeful. Whether they believe it or not, whether you, dear viewer, believe it or not, the socialist's fundamental view of the world is cautiously optimistic, hopeful for a bright future, but grounded in material reality. A better world is possible, chants the socialist. This is the ethos of the so-called far left. A better world for the workers, a better world for the underprivileged, a better world for the exploited. Wherever they look, the socialist sees the chains of the status quo waiting to be broken. Those chains, the socialists must remind themselves, cannot be broken by them or by some savior. Those chains must be broken by those who wear them, by a working class armed with an understanding of the methods of its own exploitation and the collective solidarity necessary to free itself. The socialist views the liberal status quo as historically necessary, but outmoded. Just as the aristocracy took power from the monarch, just as the capitalist then took power from the aristocracy, so too will the workers take power from the capitalist. History is shaped by the struggles between classes and the mediations of class antagonisms. While the left liberal might understand oppression in its social forms, the socialist also understands oppression as inherent to the liberal system itself. Capitalism can only work if the owner can profit off of the worker's labor, if the first world can exploit the third. The socialist bristles at injustice, at unnecessary hierarchies, at exploitation and oppression in service to a fundamentally violent and inefficient system. Capitalism paid to build the factory, says the socialist, but it is the workers who built it, the workers who make it profitable, and therefore the workers who should own it. The socialist sees many social hierarchies as artificial or unnecessary. For example, the so-called nuclear family is understood as an invention of the industrial age, a social grouping and delineation of duties designed to maximize the time available for a male breadwinner to produce value for his employer, while his wife raised the next generation of labor. Gender roles have only solidified into their modern form in recent centuries and through the propagation of European norms. Throughout history and throughout the rest of the world, labor and social practices have been allocated between genders in wildly different ways, sometimes involving additional, non-binary gender roles and modes of expression, or even a degree of fluidity between those modes. Race, ethnicity, and nationality, too, have no objective scientific bases upon which to justify the exploitation and oppression that have resulted from such historical social classifications. So on and so forth. With every form of social hierarchy or classification, the socialist engages in the ruthless critique of all existing things. He bitches about it a lot. Is this social construct necessary for society? Does it justify all the harm associated with it? Can we progress without it? Now, this doesn't mean that the socialist is opposed to participation in marriage, in child-rearing, in monogamy, in gender roles. None of that. Rather, they just want to be freed from coerced participation in such social functions. You can do it. Don't make me do it. The socialist, despite how they are often portrayed, does not demand the imposition of some artificial equality or sameness for all people. Rather, the socialist demands the dissolution of artificial systems of inequality. The rapid expansion of literacy, education, health services, housing, food, and infrastructure are, in fact, a hallmark of past socialist projects, because the socialist believes that removing artificial barriers to success and prosperity is a fundamental necessity for a healthy society. The socialist believes that your ability to read, eat, house yourself, access basic necessities, and educate yourself should not be limited by wealth or social classification. The socialist believes that the modern human condition, isolated, alienated, incentivized to shop and consume privately rather than living and experiencing publicly, is detrimental to humanity as a whole. The consumption and disposal of mass-produced goods manufactured in sweatshops in the third world, the endless factory-produced slop served as food, the lifetime spent consuming images rather than enjoying shared reality, the delineation of all time and activity around schedules of your own exploitative labor, these are the horrors of a hyper-consumptive culture oriented toward the enrichment of the few at the expense of billions. And the socialist is desperate to return to the worker some sense of humanity and fulfillment instead of a continued existence of consumption and decay. The socialist's goal, overall, is liberation, revolution, rupture, a break from the systems of exploitation and oppression that harm the masses for the benefit of the few. They aren't interested in destroying your way of life, unless you've decided that cruelty and repression are inseparable from your lifestyle. The socialist doesn't hate or target anyone for reasons of race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexuality, or ability. They are opposed only to the status quo which prioritizes some over others. The socialist is opposed to the billionaire capitalist, the violent settler colonist, the war profiteer, the enforcers of the state's violence. Note that these are all things that you can choose to stop being. No matter how the defenders of the liberal status quo might portray them, the socialist is not pursuing some magical utopia. They only want to work toward a better world. It is possible, says the socialist, to break the cycle of exploitation and oppression, of violent colonialism and endless extraction. Humans are social creatures, after all. We could not have formed early societies without learning to work together and understand each other and cooperate long before a profit motive ever existed. We live in an era of immense wealth and technological advancement, a truly post-scarcity economy. We can move past this epoch to something better. Those who hold the power to change this world are those who are most exploited by it. Those who have every reason in the world to join together and refuse to remain on this sinking ship of liberal capitalism. A better world is possible. It is ours for the taking. We have nothing left to lose but our chains. So says the socialist. Anyway. All right, we're out of the weeds now. We have a basic understanding of the ideological spectrum. The center, the far right, and the far left. I would hope that my explanation has already broken the notion of the sameness of the extremes, but just in case it hasn't, let's compare them more directly. Let's say that we are an apolitical or liberal person on the internet. We've been raised to view ideological perspectives outside of the liberal center as fundamentally equivalent. How do they actually compare to one another? The left says that a better world is possible. Society should be built around community, around mutually beneficial social structures bereft of any profit motive. Social hierarchy should be questioned, freedom of expression and identity should be protected, and systemic issues surrounding race, ethnicity, gender, queerness, etc. should not be up for debate. The right, meanwhile, says that we need to return to tradition. Survival of the fittest will ensure that only the strongest, best people survive, leaving the weak and unworthy to fall by the wayside. The individual is all that matters. His desire to conquer and triumph will drive him and society as a whole to greatness. Rising tides lift all ships, right? Social hierarchies are in fact natural hierarchies, according to the fascist, based on history and tradition and biology. Therefore, they should not be questioned and must be rigidly adhered to. Men are stronger than women, so they deserve power over them. The chosen group is the best and the strongest, so they deserve to rule and reap the rewards of society. Those who question hierarchy or threaten the demographic dominance of the in-group are inhuman and dangerous. The left believes that in an advanced, post-industrial, post-scarcity society, basic human needs should be understood as fundamental rights rather than as commodities to be bought and sold. The left views the international working class of all peoples, ethnicities, races, religions, gender, sexualities, and abilities as a historic actor, as an engine of progress which, when armed with awareness of itself as a cohesive whole capable of effecting change, will consign the current systems of exploitation and oppression to the dustbin of history. The right believes that survival should motivate people to work harder. To provide basic human needs to all people would be an encouragement of laziness, of weakness. Worse, it would be an affront to nature, in which only the strong and able are allowed to survive. The chosen in-group, regardless of class, deserves dominion over all others, deserves to reap rewards from the exploitation and labor of the out-group. To the right, the third world wouldn't be exploited if it were as strong as the first world. It's eat or be eaten. To the left, liberal capitalism is an oppressive system that should be abolished in favor of something better. They do not deny the important historic role that liberalism and capitalism have played in building the modern world. They celebrate the achievements while acknowledging its failures. No billionaire capitalist is going to support the socialist left. They could only do so if they returned their stolen profit to their workers and ended the systems that produce their own wealth. It is fundamentally opposed to their material interests to support actual, revolutionary, radical, expropriatory ideological formations such as socialism. Anyone you hear claiming that there is a billionaire socialist who is funding the left is fundamentally unaware of how socialism works. The right is ambivalent toward capitalism, ideologically speaking. The right's ideological focus is more on identity and dominance rather than economics or class, so capitalism isn't really their enemy. They might point to certain beneficiaries of capitalism, individual billionaires from outside their in-group, for example, as evidence of degeneracy and humiliation being inflicted against the in-group, but they will never pursue a systemic critique of capitalism as a system. In fact, the right's ideology lends itself quite well to a system in which greed, competition, profit-seeking, and exploitation are inherent. Historically, the billionaire is, in times of crisis, likely to encourage and arm the fascist right against the socialist left. The right may dislike the status quo for social and cultural reasons, but the left wants to abolish the systems of exploitation and profit that have furnished the billionaire with their wealth and power. Using the right as a weapon against the left is just good business, after all. The ideological left and right, the real extremes, not those within the liberal center, are diametrically opposed to one another. They cannot find common ground. They are oil and water. The right will see a trans character in media and denounce them as a groomer. The left will just see that character as a normal person, confused by the vitriol espoused by the right. The left may be outraged by repressive violence against protesters of a genocide. The right will be incapable of understanding why anyone would sympathize with terrorists in the first place. The left is opposed to the capitalist, the imperialist, the bigot, the repressive arm of the state. The right is opposed to races or ethnicities separate from their own. Queer and trans people, disabled people, women who do not want to have children with them, and those who reject traditional hierarchies. Can you see the difference here? The left's enemies are societal and economic roles. Roles which can be opted out of. Meanwhile, the enemies of the right are immutable, unchanging identities. Now, the left encourages so-called class traders, people who turn their backs on materially advantageous social and economic roles to side with the working class. Socialist history is full of class traders. Hell, the first plantation in Cuba to be liberated during the revolution was the one that belonged to Fidel Castro's own mother. You do not have to be opposed to liberation if you don't want to be. But to the right, you are marked by birth as the enemy. Your skin color, your nationality, your ability, your gender, your sexuality, these are things that you can't change, but they will be used by the right to justify your repression. With that in mind, let's circle back to the original tweet. A large section of the VTuber community hates anything that they think is right-wing. Armed with our understanding of left and right-wing ideology, we can examine this statement more critically. Why might so many VTubers be opposed to anything they think is right-wing? Maybe it's because many VTubers are from non-Western countries, outside of the ethnic in-group, are queer, are immune-compromised or disabled, are women who are unmarried or self-sustaining, or they just have an audience of people who fit those descriptions. Perhaps many VTubers understand that the ideology of the extreme right is a direct threat to their livelihoods. We have now defined a basic ideological spectrum. We've clarified how the extremes of that spectrum are fundamentally incompatible with each other. They cannot be grouped together as mere equivalent extremes in any sensible way. Now, we must answer the most important question for any well-meaning, moderate, apolitical, or otherwise liberal viewer who has stuck with me through the entire video until now, oh my god, I am so sorry. That question is, why the fuck should I care? No, really, I'm not a fascist, I'm not a socialist, I'm not anything. I'm not interested in politics or ideology. Sure, maybe you have a point about not equating the extremes. Fascism seems pretty bad, I agree, but why should any of that matter to me? To answer this question, we have to take a look at more concrete historical examples of how ideology can be twisted. By this point, I think that we can agree that the beliefs of the ideological extremes are fairly concrete. Perhaps you even share one or two beliefs with one side or the other, even if you don't identify with the ideologies themselves. Maybe you think women deserve independence and bodily autonomy, but maybe you're not comfortable with all that gender stuff. Maybe you're not the biggest fan of capitalism, or maybe you're not the biggest fan of modernity. You're a rational person, right? You're intelligent. You want to weigh all your options. Sure, those extremes seem to have some pretty deeply rooted sociological elements that undergird their respective ideological outlooks, according to Whisper at least, but you fundamentally feel like you can logically, rationally, pick and choose the positions that you want to hold. You don't need ideology to hold a position on something, right? You don't need ideology to not hold a position either. You can be moderate. You can find compromise. To your left is a man who says that black people deserve equal rights under the law. To your right is a Klansman holding a noose. Compromise. Go ahead. Find the compromise position. Find the rational, moderate position between those two conflicting viewpoints. Can't solve that one? Okay, try this one. To your left is a trans person who wants to live their life with freedom and dignity, as the identity of their choosing. Sociologists and doctors all agree that this is safe and acceptable for the person to do, that it will make them happier and more likely to lead a long, happy life. To your right is a man who believes that trans people are groomers and perverts who prey on children. He wants to legally require trans people to detransition and identify as something that they are not. He will use the law to drive trans people out of every bathroom, every sport, every public space until they either resign themselves to a life of pain and unhappiness or end their lives entirely. Compromise. What's the middle ground? Are we going to define which trans people are allowed to transition? Do we decide that gender identity is only applicable sometimes? Those who are opposed to trans people seem to hold a lot of institutional power right now, so refusing to take a side essentially means ceding to them. There's no sitting this one out, but maybe you can solve this one instead. To your left is a woman who believes that women's bodily autonomy should be respected, that they should be able to choose their own lives and pursue their own goals, that women should have these rights and take them by any means. To your right is a man who believes that he is owed your body and your obedience. He will pursue every possible legal path to acquire you, mind, body, and soul, because he fundamentally views you as a thing to be enjoyed and used for sexual reproduction. Compromise. Now, perhaps you're saying, Whisper, it's not fair. There are more moderate positions between those extremes. Incremental change is how progress is made. Okay, fine. Here are more moderate positions. Another woman to your left, closer this time, believes that women should ideally have autonomy and independence, but that no one should break the law or subvert the system to gain it. To your right, again, closer this time, is a man who doesn't fully appreciate the whole women should be property idea that the other guy had, but he is tired of how mean women seem to be nowadays. He can't say anything anymore without getting in trouble. They shouldn't be property, sure, but maybe they got a little too much independence? Women are just so emotional, so uninterested in him. Maybe they need to be reined in just a little bit. Can you see what's happening? The left says equal rights, no matter what. The progressive ideally wants equal rights, but they will disavow any attempt to take or aggressively push for them. If the left pushes too hard, if it pursues equality and autonomy by any means, then the progressive will push back against them for circumventing the system. The rule of law must prevail, says the progressive. The status quo must be preserved. We can achieve progress eventually. Go too far, too fast, and the progressive will echo the outrage of the right wing. You can't just take your own rights. You have to let us vote on them first. And the conservative, well, he isn't a big fan of how women act these days. The fascist whispers in his ear that he's right, that he shouldn't have to fear women. Sure, the conservative doesn't want to get his hands dirty, and he disagrees with some of the more extreme stuff, but things would be much closer to his ideal if he let the fascists take the reins for a little while. It might not be perfect, of course, but I mean, can't let good be the enemy of perfect, right? And he certainly doesn't want the progressive or the left to have their way. That would just make things worse. God, no. He might not actively aid the fascist, maybe, but he won't stop them. Maybe they can return things to how they were, say, 20 years ago or so. That would be perfect. How do you compromise between equality and death? Between having the freedom to live your life how you want and being treated as a predator just for existing? Between having bodily autonomy and being forced to reproduce? Should you feel guilty for breaking unjust laws? Is the enemy of your enemy your friend? Consequences be damned. These aren't hypothetical questions, they're real ones, and history has proven time and time again how such questions are ultimately answered. Progressives want progress, but are unwilling to drastically alter the status quo. Conservatism would like to rein in that status quo. Progressives might share some of the left's criticisms, but conservatives agree with the fascist assertion that the present is at odds with their ideals, that we should retreat back to some idealized past. When crises of the liberal order have arisen, progressives have taken great care to criticize both the right and the left, to prove their moderate, rational bona fides. The conservatives already share most of the right's grievances. It's the multiculturalism, it's the wokeness, it's the gender, it's the feminism, it's the modernity. In the end, the conservative, passively or actively, aided the fascists over the alternative. The progressives, for all their talk of rational debate with both the left and the right, were lumped in with the left and treated as such. Like how your one problematic uncle calls Democrats communists. Imagine that, but with, consequences. In the 1920s, the liberal and Catholic parties sided with the relatively unpopular Italian fascists to quell the growing socialist movement. In the 1930s, the SPD, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, chose to militantly oppose the KPD, the Communist Party of Germany, and the Nazi Party, rather than allying with the communists against the fascists. Attacked by both the SPD and the Nazis, the communists were eventually arrested, banned from government, and sent to concentration camps. With the KPD absent and unable to vote in opposition, the Enabling Act of 1933 allowed Adolf Hitler to seize power, which he immediately used to ban and arrest the SPD for having voted against said act. Why am I talking about all of this? Am I demanding that you pick a side or get into heated internet debates with everyone you disagree with? No, not at all. I maintain a strongly felt ideological position, obviously, but I only arrived at it after years of studying history and politics and interacting with other people. I read a lot, so I learned a lot. I'm not saying that you have to agree with me on everything or else you're a fascist. I'm just saying that you should understand the role that ideology plays in the world around you. You should understand why some people, especially people from marginalized or historically disenfranchised groups, are much more hostile to reactionary, right-wing rhetoric than you are. Those people understand their own history and how the tides turn against them when right-wing ideas reach their natural conclusion. The center, the conservatives, even the progressives have historically aided, enabled, or failed to stop fascists from taking power. You can't debate a fascist out of his worldview, nor can you use logic and compromise to prevent him from doing harm. In times of social, political, and economic turmoil, all that is solid melts into air. The cracks in the liberal capitalist status quo begin to show, and people start to question whether that status quo is even worth preserving. Some see an opportunity to pursue a more egalitarian, less exploitative society. Others see a chance to claw society back into violent tribalism. You don't have to think like I do, but you need to understand and recognize why so many people, online and off, are so openly hostile to anything even remotely right-wing. It's because we've been here before. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Returning once more to the original tweet that started all of this mess. Half of society may not be a Nazi in our eyes, but far too many people seem far too comfortable or complacent with openly fascist ideology. And it is absolutely understandable to be outraged or terrified by their rhetoric. You don't have to go waving the red flag or singing the International, but for God's sake, do not stand on the sidelines when people's right to exist is being debated. You cannot afford to be neutral on a moving train.
Everyone looks the same till you see where you stand.